Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It has been a couple of days since the last time we spoke to you, and I know at that point on, I think it was either Monday or Tuesday, we were talking about flash flooding potential for the Gulf Coast states from Louisiana all the way towards the panhandle of Florida and Alabama, even going as far east as Georgia. Well, I hate to tell you, but it's going to be more of the same for the rest of this week, and especially over the next couple of days for the areas circled in black, where we are going to see once again continuous shower and thunderstorm activity that is going to reinvigorate flooding concerns for much of the deep south. We also do have a severe weather threat to talk about for, once again, speaking of broken records, the Central Plains, for places like Oklahoma and Kansas. As a matter of fact, let me just preview that for you guys and show you right now exactly what I'm talking about here on our Day 1 Outlook. And actually, I lied. It looks like the highest risk potential for today is actually going to be out towards Texas. Much of eastern Texas, even going all the way back towards northern portions of San Antonio, Austin, and even portions of the Dallas Metroplex. We also do have a marginal risk of severe weather extending westward into New Mexico. I think I may have been looking ahead to the next couple of days for our severe weather risk, because eventually that severe weather threat does move north into places like Oklahoma and Kansas going into the rest of this week. We're going to get into all that during today's video, so if you do enjoy the content we provide here on this channel, also known as Weather Minds, be sure to like and subscribe, share with family and friends who will be impacted by these weather hazards. There is one thing that I want to talk about before we go into anything weather related. I do have a quick announcement for the channel moving forward. On Friday, I am going to be doing the first ever live stream here on Weather Minds. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a different format with our live streams as you may be accustomed to. I know a lot of channels out there typically will do like your severe weather forecast discussion for a particular event of next week or in the coming days. Whatever the situation is, typically that's how those streams are geared. I'm going to be a little bit different, and I'm going to leave it up to you guys on what you want me to talk about. I know there's a large swath of the country that doesn't get enough coverage. I'm talking about you, Colorado and Wyoming and Montana, pretty much everybody else in the Rockies and the Pacific Northwest. We don't talk about you as much. So if you're somebody from that area, for example, and you want to talk about the weather for the rest of the weekend for Seattle, Tacoma, we can talk about it. If you're somebody that lives in Breckenridge, I think it's Breckenridge, Colorado? Somewhere in the Rockies. If you live in Breckenridge and you're at the resort and you want to know how much snowfall there's going to be at 8,000 feet, or are we going to even see snowfall, we can also talk about that as well. So you can kind of get where I'm going with this. The live stream on Friday night is going to be geared towards you guys. You have the power to ask me any question you want. You can just post it in the live stream comments. I'll go over everything and anything you want to. We can talk about the weather for next week because there is a significant severe potential for early next week for, once again, the same areas we've seen severe weather the last couple of weeks, Central Plains, even possibly up towards the lower Great Lakes. Whatever you want to talk about, I'm happy to divulge and dissect. So that's going to be Friday night, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. So tune in, join, discuss, ask questions, and I'd be happy to talk about that. I think it would make for a really fun discussion. Really looking forward to it. So be there or be square. And also, before we get started today, I want to thank each and every one of you for subscribing to the channel over the last few days. As I mentioned at the very top of this video, I have not posted, I guess you could say, weather discussion content. It's been mostly just YouTube shorts because of just the limited time that I've had. But a lot of you have really enjoyed those. And as I've said in previous videos, the content that I pull from on the YouTube shorts, I make sure that it's not copywritten or has a watermark. I try to pick something that's interesting and also relevant to the channel that I think is really cool to look at for you guys and something that I think I would enjoy. So I really do stick to that. If there's any time that there is a watermark or something's copyright striked, or not striked, but it has a copyright tag to it, I don't post it. So if there is ever, I just want to make this clear for everybody too, if there's ever a situation where I pull from a video that doesn't have either one of those things, and somebody was to approach me and say, hey, I have a copyright on that maybe YouTube didn't pick up on it, I'm happy to work with that individual. I don't want any of you guys to think that I'm like going out there and stealing content. I really do my due diligence to make sure, number one, it's something that's interesting, but also that it's compliant with Fair Use Act and things like that. So if there ever is a case where it's not, and I mess up or make a mistake and I overlook something, of course I will be fully compliant and complicit in working with that individual who's the creator of that video. Otherwise, it's fair game. I'll share it and let you guys watch it. But thank you guys so much for subscribing. Really do appreciate it. And as I've talked about too, guys, content-wise, scheduling is going to be a little bit weird. I'll make sure to get a short out every single day for you. As far as these weather discussions are concerned, they're not going to be as consistent over the next, call it 7 days. Once I get down to South Carolina and get moved in and everything, then you're going to expect a lot more of a consistent schedule. We'll get more of a consistent uploading going on. So definitely looking forward to that. So anyway, we're going to dive into today's video. And as I mentioned before, be sure to like and subscribe, and let's get right to it. We'll begin first by taking a look at the latest severe weather and flooding outlooks for today. We'll start first on the severe weather side. As we mentioned and foreshadowed at the top of the video, we do have an enhanced risk for severe weather encompassing much of central Texas, but also including portions of the Dallas Metroplex, especially the far southern reaches of the Dallas Metroplex, and then also the northern suburbs of Houston. We then also have a slight risk of severe weather extending west towards what would be far west central Texas, just to the south of Abilene and much of the Texas Panhandle. Although Abilene, you're going to be pretty damn close to that marginal and slight, so you're still in it as well. But that's going to be for today. If we break down, though, the different hazard types, we do have a 5% tour over the same areas we outlined: southern portions of the Dallas Metroplex, northern suburbs of Houston. And then the hail and wind threat sort of bounces around a bit. We actually expect the highest hail potential and the most significant hail potential to be actually west of some of the more populated areas, especially out towards, more so northern reaches of San Antonio, just the north there of El Paso, where we do have a significant risk of not just hail, but very large hail. There likely is some form of a dry line component that plays into that. It's not a surprise for you folks in Texas to see much of the hail potential further west of, say, that Dallas to Houston line, as we start to have more of that dry air component, southwesterly flow in the lower levels that does allow for some of those steeper lapse rates. So no surprise at all that we're seeing a sig hail a little bit further west. However, if we look at the wind potential for today, you do see that shifts back east over those same populated areas. Once again, we are expected to see more of a damaging wind threat. There is still that 5% chance of tours over the areas that have been outlined and that enhanced. That being said, there does lie a higher potential for damaging wind, as a lot of these storms are expected to grow upscale and form some of these bowing segments that tend to produce damaging straight line winds over, even in some cases, long periods of time. So, as you can see, 30% chance of wind. We even have, in some cases, for some of you, a 30% SIG chance of hail, and then a 5% tour for eastern and essentially south central Texas. I also want to mention that we have a flooding threat. It's not just going to be a severe weather threat for today. We also have a pretty high risk of flooding. As a matter of fact, there it is. Speaking of high, we now have a high risk for flash flooding over the area highlighted there in pink. And then we also have a moderate risk for heavier rainfall outlined just to the west and to the east of that high. Folks, this is an area that we have seen significant rainfall just in the last couple of days. It's not like this is a new pattern coming in. We have seen this constant Pacific flow moving over the same region. And if I was to draw it out, it pretty much looks like that exactly. You just have constant Pacific flow moving through, Pacific moisture, Pacific forcing, along with Gulf Stream moisture in the lower levels. That creates a pretty saturated profile. So Pacific air in the mid-levels, lower levels being that moisture advection from the Gulf, creates a pretty saturated environment. And in cases where you have storms that are training over the same areas, that's going to lead to some significant flash flooding. So Weather Prediction Center has issued a high risk for today. That means that there is a very high potential that we could see some pretty significant flash flooding. Not just that, but we could be seeing rainfall rates and even P-watt values, precipitable water values, that are much higher than essentially the mean, or what's typically for this area. Let me see if I can pull up the discussion. I want to see if I can real quick. Let's go ahead and look at that for a second. I'm not going to go over everything, but the one thing I want to mention is it does say a vigorous shortwave trough leading 110 knot zonal jet move across Texas into tonight. Zonal, we're also referring to Pacific, so pretty much the same thing. Air mass is characterized by P-watts that may exceed 2.25 inches, which is above the 95th percentile for P-watts for this time of year and is over 3 sigma above normal. I would love to do a discussion about statistics and talking about what that means, but if I was to break that down simply, this type of saturated environment is not common at all for this area this time of year. And we're talking about eastern Texas and western Louisiana that sit pretty much right on the Gulf. So to see that type of saturated environment at this time of year, as they're trying to outline to you guys, that is incredible, right? Very, very much above normal for this area. And also the fact that it's going to be 2.25 inch precipitable water, you know, I would even say 1.5, 1.6 is high. To see it above 2 inches, even 2.25 inches of precipitable water is something that you very rarely see, especially in a place like this. And they even highlight dangerous and life-threatening flash flooding. Flash flooding is the most deadly hazard out of all of them. Tornadoes, hurricanes, etc. Take this seriously. We could be talking about rainfall rates that exceed 3 inches per hour in the strongest storms, and that's especially because we have a lot of CAPE to work with too, a lot of potential energy that can be tapped into in some of that deeper convection. 1 to 2 inches per hour rainfall rates, though, will be common. That's going to be the standard. We could even see rainfall rates exceeding even that, which is pretty incredible. Let's now take a closer look at our current jet stream, and there's a couple of things to point out here that I think are really going to culminate to what we experienced today in terms of our flooding and severe weather threat. The first thing is we don't have a uniform jet stream. It's actually broken up into two. The first one being our polar jet, which is up towards the north, indicated by this black arrow moving from the poles to the equator. That's our polar jet. We then also have a secondary jet flow in the form of our Pacific jet. Now, you heard before that the SPC and the WPC was referring to this sort of zonal flow. What they're really referring to is this Pacific jet that's just moving from west to east. And as it does so, it's bringing Pacific moisture into the areas circled here in black from the Gulf all the way back to Texas. We talked about this at the very beginning of the video, but why is that important? Well, we have essentially moisture advection in the low levels, right? It's being advected in the direction oriented by this arrow, essentially from east to eventually northwest. That's in the low levels, but then in the mid levels, we have a secondary moisture advection source coming from the Pacific. That's going to allow your profile from the surface upward in height to be very saturated. That's how we're essentially getting these really high precipitable water values today, anywhere between 2 to 2.25 inches of water equivalent. That's really high, and you can thank this pattern for that. The other thing I wanted to mention too is we have within this zonal flow a neutrally tilted, almost negatively tilted shortwave trough feature. And that is going to be associated with our surface low pressure system that's going to be just downstream of that trough axis. Within that trough axis, though, you can see these orange and dark orange colors. That's actually correlating to stronger winds at this height level, around 3 to 5 kilometers off the ground. Specifically, we're talking about winds exceeding anywhere between 90 to 100 knots along this area. So not only do we have a really saturated environment for areas downstream of this trough axis, but we also have a lot of forcing behind that too, in the form of strong winds with height, as well as our frontal features that are going to be progressing eastward as we get into the afternoon and evening hours. Speaking of which, let's take a look at some of those model outputs that we have for later on tonight. So here is our latest output from one of our convective allowing models, the HRRR, and I should say it's courtesy of Pivotal Weather. We are taking a look here as of this morning. Showers and thunderstorms should continue for much of the Red River Valley going into the early afternoon before we eventually see some reinvigorated convection fire up right around, say, the early afternoon and evening hours. You see that here on the model output. You get a lot of clustering going on. However, we could anticipate that some of these storms will likely be supercells to the north of Houston, could have the possibility of producing tornadoes. Sheer magnitudes are not that great. However, we do have plenty of veering to work with. So there lies the opportunity that some of these do produce a couple of tornadoes. There is that conditional 5% threat for the Houston area and areas to the north later on this afternoon and early evening. But as we go forward into the evening hours, into the overnight, you see a lot of these storms by the time they reach the Louisiana-Texas border are very clustered. As a matter of fact, the HRRR does hint at more of an MCS forming as opposed to some of those discrete supercells that we see or are expecting to see earlier on this afternoon. We then have another complex that fires up towards the south of the Texas Panhandle around that same time towards the evening, right around 7, 8 o'clock tonight. Then as we go beyond tonight into the overnight, we see those storms training over very similar areas that we saw that high risk for flooding right in the area circled here in black from central Louisiana back towards the Houston area and even Nacogdoches, Texas. And why? Because we're seeing really intense thunderstorms moving over the same areas going into tomorrow afternoon and evening. That continues over the next couple of days. And if we look at those rainfall totals for the next 24 to 48 hours, we could even start with the first 24. Look at that, folks. We're talking about anywhere between 3 to 6 inches of rainfall painted by this orange and dark orange coloring. If we take, though, the total QPF, or the total precipitation over the next 24 to 48 hours, look at that. I mean, again, we're talking about nearly 7 to, in some cases locally, 8 inches of rainfall outside of that 3 to 6 general range. But mostly speaking, 3 to 6 seems to be the common norm for this area, but we could see even locally higher amounts if we take into account not just tonight's thunderstorms, but also Friday's. Well, listen, thank you guys so much for tuning in and your continued support on the channel. Let me know your thoughts on the format of this video. I did something a little bit different this time. Let me know your feedback and comments down below, and we'll see you on the next weather video.